What if a book could fundamentally transform how you understand power and liberation, maybe even what it means to be human?
That's a big question.
It is. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a text that, well, it really did that. And it still resonates hugely across the globe.
We're talking about Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, a truly seminal work.
Exactly. And specifically, we'll dig into Jean-Paul Sartre's preface, which is just incredibly powerful on its own. And then Fanon's first chapter concerning violence, super intense. Plus, we'll touch on his ideas about national culture and the psychological scars of colonial war.
Yeah, it's not just history, is it? It's very raw. A really unflinching look at, oppression and the path to freedom. A radical path, as Fanon saw it.
So our mission today really is to unpack the core arguments and maybe some of the surprising insights in these texts.
Right. To help you navigate this, well, it's a complex landscape, isn't it?
Definitely. We want to shed light on the cost, the transformations of decolonization, what it all means for, well, our collective human journey.
Let's try to unearth some of those nuggets of truth hidden inside.
Okay, let's start with Sartre. His preface really sets the stage, and it's pretty stark from the get-go.
It really is. He talks about how European writers just dismissed native voices, saw them as mere wailing.
Yeah, and he quotes that line, "You are making us into monstrosities. Your humanism claims we are at one with the rest of humanity, but your racist methods set us apart." Powerful stuff. What's the main contradiction he's pointing out there?
Well, it's this comfort the colonial administrators had. They were comfortable with these massive contradictions.
Believing nothing would come of the talk.
Exactly. Nothing will come of it but talk. That dismissal, Sartre shows, wasn't just accidental. It was foundational.
Yeah.
It let them carry on with this brutal policy of dehumanization.
And it was a policy. Sartre spells out the logic, and it's chilling. You can't enslave or kill a fellow human without committing a crime, right? So
you just declare the native is not one of our fellow men. Simple as that in their logic.
But how did that abstract idea become, real? Through actual violence and policy. What examples does Sartre use?
He lays it out as this systematic process, reducing people to superior monkeys or beasts of burden, wiping out traditions, replacing languages, destroying culture, actively.
And the examples are?
Horrifying. He mentions the Congo cutting off hands, Angola piercing lips with padlocks to silence dissent. I mean, these aren't just random acts of cruelty. They're part of the system he's describing.
It's hard to even comprehend. So Sartre connects this brutality to an inevitable turning point. How does that work?
Yeah, he sees this relentless logic pushing the colonizer into a corner, a dilemma.
Which is?
They need to exploit the native, but they can't commit outright genocide, usually. And that contradiction, that tension, is what he says pushes inevitably towards decolonization.
And in the meantime, the colonized are terrified.
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
Terrified. And that suppressed fury, that violence they endure, often turns inward.
Leading to what he calls fratricidal combats, fighting amongst themselves.
Exactly, which tragically just perpetuates the dehumanization within their own communities.
And they try to cope, right, with supernatural barriers, myths, dance, spirit possession.
All sorts of things. But Sartre points out, kind of ironically, that even these coping mechanisms can deepen religious divides or estrangement.
It's a real bind.
A double bind, yeah. Seeking solace, but maybe entrenching division at the same time.
But then Sartre presents this other idea that taking up arms for the colonized, it's more than just fighting back.
Oh, absolutely. It's an act of self-creation. Profoundly so. He quotes Fanon directly here.
The kill two birds with one stone line.
That's the one. To shoot down a European is to kill two birds with one stone. To destroy an oppressor and the man he oppresses at the same time, there remain a dead man and a free man.
Wow.
In this view, violence isn't just destruction. It dissolves old tribal issues, forges a new national identity through shared struggle. It's about reclaiming agency, defining yourself against the oppressor.
Okay, this is where Sartre really flips the perspective, isn't it? He says decolonization isn't just happening to the colonized.
It's happening to Europe. Yeah. In the past, we made history, and now it is being made of us. A huge reversal.
Does he mean Europe is just passive now? Or that its role has fundamentally changed?
He means the violence they inflicted is coming home to roost.
Yeah.
Literally.
How so?
Comes back on us through our soldiers, comes inside and takes possession of us. He points to things like the nigger hunts in Algiers, Europeans burning Muslims alive.
And asks who the real savages are.
Precisely. Now, which side are the savages on? Where's barbarism? He even mocks the old colonial psychiatrists.
Let's talk about underdeveloped cortices.
Yeah. He suggests maybe they should now study French frontal sluggishness. It's biting satire, but the point is serious. The moral rot of colonialism infects the colonizer, too. Deeply.
That really challenges the whole idea of European generosity, doesn't it? You know, the aid narrative.
Completely. Sartre flat out says Europe is literally the creation of the third world because it stuffed herself inordinately with the gold and raw materials. So any aid, it's not generosity.
It's reparation.
A just reparation, in his words. It reframes the whole global economic picture, suggesting this huge unpaid debt.
And he ends the preface with this powerful plea, doesn't he? Urging Europeans not to imitate Europe.
Yeah, calls Europe a monster, uses the U.S. as an example, producing negations of man, an avalanche of murders.
So what's the alternative? What does the future need, according to Sartre?
It needs true inventions, something radically new, to create the whole man, the one Europe failed to bring about. It's a call for a totally different kind of humanism.
Untainted by empire.
Right. And that sets us up perfectly for Fanon himself in Concerning Violence.
Okay, Fanon. His core argument is, well, it's stark. Decolonization is always violent.
Always. A total, complete, and absolute substitution of one group by another.
A program of complete disorder. He sees it as the native reclaiming the violence that defined their own exploitation.
And this process, he argues, it fundamentally changes people, turns spectators crushed with their inessentiality into privileged actors.
Giving rise to new men, new language, new humanity. That's a massive claim. How does he argue it reshapes the actual human experience?
He's talking about total recreation. For the colonized, the most vital thing isn't some abstract idea, it's the land.
Bread and dignity.
Exactly. And morality. It's not about abstract ethics anymore. It's the concrete act of silencing the settler, taking their place. It's like the moral compass gets completely flipped by oppression.
Fanon also analyzes the role of the native intellectual, right?
Yeah.
They start off often alienated.
Influenced by colonial thinking, defending the Greco-Latin pedestal, Western culture.
But the struggle changes them.
It forces them, he says, to shed that individualism, to rediscover the power of the community, traditional structures like village assemblies. It's a return.
And he calls this self-criticism an old African institution.
He does. It's about finding identity within the collective struggle. A really powerful idea about how identity is forged in these intense moments.
He also talks about that inward-turned violence again, the fratricidal combats. What's the key step to overcoming that?
The crucial thing, Fanon argues, is to grab hold of that violence, to redirect it.
Away from self-destruction.
Away from self-destruction, away from just magical thinking or diversions, and focus it outwards. Against the oppressor. Turn that destructive energy into something liberating.
Which leads us to politics.
Yes.
Fanon's pretty critical of the mainstream nationalist parties.
Oh, very. He sees them as often pacifist, legalistic, reformist, aiming for negotiation around a green baize table before any real confrontation.
Does he see any value in them at all? Or just sees them as collaborators almost?
He tends to view their nonviolence as part of the colonial setup itself. A way to manage the transition, not really dismantle the power. He says they often condemn the masses' savagery.
And get overtaken by events.
Yeah, when the people rise up spontaneously. His focus is definitely on how their reformism falls short of the radical change he thinks is needed.
And the people themselves, they find different kinds of heroes.
They do. Figures like gangsters who defy the police, maybe? Or they draw inspiration from history, from past resistance leaders.
Like a Banson or Soundiata.
Exactly. And crucially, international events play a huge role. You mentioned Dien Bien Phu earlier.
The Vietnamese victory against the French.
A massive signal. It made people ask, okay, how do we do that here? It showed that the colonizers could be beaten.
And repression doesn't work. It backfires.
According to Fanon, yes. Repression actually increases that consciousness. It sends a clear message. Force is the only language the oppressor understands.
Which can lead to these spontaneous uprisings, often brutal.
Often brutal, yeah. Especially when leaders get arrested. It can force the colonial power's hand, release the leaders, start negotiating.
And this struggle then moves on to the world stage.
Absolutely. Fan talks about the masked discontent, even after independence for many. The third world finds itself in the middle of the whirlpool of global tensions.
He mentions the UN diplomats from newly independent nations having this aggressive tone.
Yeah, like Khrushchev banging his shoe, Castro in his military uniform. These weren't just quirks, they were symbols.
Sending a message.
A message to other colonized peoples. You can defy the old order. Even the powerful can be challenged.
Fanon also gets into culture, doesn't he? How colonialism tries to erase it.
Yes, he calls it a racialization of thought, denying the validity of other cultures. And this sparks reactions.
Like negritude.
Exactly. Negritude in Africa, asserting Black identity and values, or the awakening of Islam in the Arab world. Powerful counter-racisms, affirming cultural identity.
But he also notes they diverge, like the Black struggle in America versus anti-colonial fights in Africa.
Right. American Negroes realized their fight for civil liberties was different, leading to separate cultural movements. It's not monolithic.
So the intellectual's journey here is really complex. Assimilate first, then reject. Sometimes even embracing the negative stereotype, the willing to be a nigger idea.
It's a complex psychological path he traces. But crucially, Fanon argues true national culture isn't just about digging up the past.
Where's it found them?
It finds its substance, its reality, in the fight which the people wage against the forces of occupation.
He uses that poem, African Dawn.
Yeah, about Naaman, the soldier who fights for France and gets killed when he returns home. A story, Fanon says, every colonized person understood instantly.
So culture is forged in the struggle.
Exactly. The intellectual's job is global, tied to the whole nation. Culture is made as the battles are being fought out. It's dynamic, alive, not a museum piece.
Which brings us to maybe the most difficult part of the book, Fanon the psychiatrist, detailing the mental toll.
Yeah, his clinical examples they're harrowing, just gut-wrenching.
You remind us of some of the key ones?
There's the militant who plants a bomb, then suffers crippling anxiety, suicidal thoughts, triggered by meeting likable colonizers afterwards, agonizing over innocent victims.
And his personal life is affected.
Profoundly. Sexual dysfunction tied to the trauma of his wife's rape by soldiers. He initially saw her as rotten because of it. It's just layers of trauma.
And the survivor of a massacre.
Develops these undifferentiated homicidal impulsions, wants to kill everyone, even the doctor, just to feel safe. A desperate, broken state.
And the young Algerian soldier.
The ALN soldier, yeah. Severe anxiety, depersonalization after killing a settler's wife. It gets tangled up with his own mother's death, his sister's abduction. He feels his blood ebbing away, just devastating psychological wounds.
But it wasn't just the colonized suffering, was it?
No, and that's crucial. Fanon shows the European torturers weren't immune. Depression, anxiety.
One recognized a victim in the hospital.
Yes, causing the victim to try and kill himself. Fanon talks about the torturers' rage and fear, how the violence spills into their own families.
Even children.
He notes children showing sadistic behavior, killing a European boy because the Europeans want to kill all the Arabs. It's this horrifying cycle. Terror, counter-terror, violence, counter-violence.
Refugee women.
Often developing severe mental health issues around childbirth, puerperal psychoses linked to the sheer destitution and insecurity. Delusions that the French would kill their babies, just constant terror.
So Fanon, with his medical background, directly refutes those colonial explanations for native behavior, like the lazy native idea.
Completely demolishes them. Laziness. No, he says, it's conscious sabotage of the colonial machine. Criminality, a direct product of the colonial situation, not some inherent flaw.
He even suggests crime rates might drop during the war.
Yeah, because the common enemy channels that anger outwards. Yeah. He's fundamentally reframing what the colonizers dismissed as pathology. He's saying it's a rational response to an utterly irrational violent system.
Okay, so independence is achieved. But Fanon warns it's not the end of the struggle. There are new dangers, economic ones.
Big time. Many nations remain economically dependent. Stuck in the old colonial trade patterns.
Accepting aid that just helps the former colonizer.
Exactly. Small injections of aid that keep the factories in the mother country going. Private money flees. Economies stagnate. Formal independence doesn't mean economic freedom. Not automatically.
And then there's the rise of a new native middle class. He's not optimistic about them, is he?
Not at all. Calls them a greedy caste.
Focus on personal gain.
Pretty much. Competing with the old guard, investing abroad, spending on luxuries, turning their countries into tourist traps, brothels of Europe, he calls it.
Harsh.
Very. He argues this new bourgeoisie fails completely to build a real national economy. They just step into the exploitative shoes left by the colonials, a new internal exploitation.
And old divisions can resurface too. Instead of fighting the colonizer, people fight each other.
Yes. Ultranationalism, chauvinism, racism can flare up. Old tribal or regional rivalries come back. Dahomeyans versus Ivory Coasters, Senegalese versus Sudanese, those kinds of examples.
And religion.
Religious differences can be stoked, sometimes by the former colonizers themselves, creating new fractures.
Even the political parties, the liberation movements, can decay.
He warns they can become just a screen hiding the real problems, degenerate into tribal dictatorships where leaders favor their own ethnic group or family. It leads to more fragmentation. It's a really sobering picture of the post-independence pitfalls.
So it sounds quite bleak, but Fanon does offer a path forward, right? A different way.
Oh, absolutely. He argues for a policy that deliberately privileges the backcountry, the outcast masses, the people who are most marginalized.
He really believed in the masses.
Profoundly. He insisted they are capable of governing themselves, that they understand perfectly the most complicated problems if you just talk to them clearly. No jargon meant to cheat the people. Huge faith in ordinary people's intelligence.
And he saw this in action in Algeria.
Yeah, he points to liberated areas where production actually increased despite the war, because the work was tied to freedom, to responsibility, to consciousness.
The more intelligence you bring to your work, the more pleasure you will have in it. It's about meaningful work.
Exactly. Not just toil. Conscious, engaged labor.
What about the youth? They're often a focus after revolutions.
He saw them as vulnerable, maybe idle, drawn to less positive Western influences. His idea was to channel their energy
Into
productive work, fields, schools, integrate sport into nation building, not just commercial entertainment. Harness that youthful energy positively.
And collective action is key to all this.
Absolutely central. Individual experience ceases to be individual in the struggle. Building a bridge isn't just engineering. It has to enrich the awareness of the workers. It comes from their muscles and brains.
And women's role.
Crucial. They must have exactly the same place as men, not just legally, but in daily life. Real equality.
And the army. Not separate.
No, it needs to be politically educated, nationalized, integrated with a wider militia. The whole nation fights. The whole nation works. It's a vision of total mobilization, building a shared consciousness. And for Fanon, nationalism, while it's necessary, it's not the end goal.
Right. It can't be just sterile formalism.
It has to deepen, transform quickly into a broader consciousness of social and political needs, into humanism, ultimately.
The living expression of the nation is the moving consciousness of the whole of the people.
The coherent, enlightened action of men and women. It's about moving beyond just the nation, towards a truly universal humanism.
Wow, what a journey. Really digging into Fanon and Sartre. It's intense.
It really is. We've covered so much ground. Colonial dehumanization, the double-edged sword of violence, the psychological trauma.
Yeah, and the huge challenges after liberation, too.
Yeah.
Social, political, economic.
The core message, though, seems to be this powerful call for a true humanism.
One that doesn't just imitate the old, flawed European models.
Right. It demands a fundamental rethink of human relationships, of how societies are structured, looking beyond the surface.
So Fanon leaves us with this challenge, doesn't he, to invent and make discoveries.
Turn over a new leaf, set afoot a new man. He basically says humanity is waiting for something more, something better than just copying a failed Europe.
Which leads to the final thought for you listening.
Yeah.
What does it mean right here, right now, for you to maybe contribute to inventing that new man, that truly human future? How do we avoid just repeating the old patterns?